World leaders are here in New York to meet for the United Nations General Assembly and for Climate Week. The Bahamas is one of the countries most impacted by climate change. I'm meeting with Prime Minister Philip Davis, who's going to talk to me about how the island is impacted, who's to blame, and who should bear the costs. Thank you so much for joining me.
It's a pleasure being here with you.
I was wondering if we could start by just, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the kinds of impacts that you are seeing in the Bahamas as a result of the rising sea levels and climate changes.
I think to put it all in perspective, we have to understand the geography of the Bahamas. We are what I call an ocean state, spread over 100,000 square miles of pristine, tranquil water. And as one astronaut once said, it's the most beautiful sight from space. And we think it's the most beautiful spot in the world. And we have about 700 islands, rocks, and keys. The challenge is that the landmass, 80% plus of our landmass, is a mere 3 meters above sea level. So the rising seas that comes along with the existential threat of climate change threatens to swallow up all of our landmass in due course. And we are in what I call the alleyway of hurricanes. Our last hurricane was Dorian, a Category 5 hurricane that spent about 3 to 4 days over 2 of our islands, Abaco and Grand Bahama. The loss and damage for that is estimated to be more than $3.4 billion. When you take that in a context of what our annual revenue might be, is usually around $2.9 billion. The loss occasioned by that one single event would have wiped out the complete annual revenue of the country. We are not fortunate enough to be in that category of countries that could access financing either by way of concessionary loan and or by way of donor contributions, because we are determined to be a high-income country, and so we excluded. So that's the cycle that we find ourselves in, where we have to borrow, adding to our national debt, which impedes progress in our development, providing the social services that's needed for my people, and the other needs of my people to uplift them, to ensure that they could fulfill their God-given potential. So it's a devastating impact it has on our country. And the global north has to take that into context when we speak about their responsibility.
Coming to that straight away, I mean, the Bahamas has filed legal submissions to the International Court of Justice calling for countries to be held account for their climate policies. I mean, which countries are you talking about when you're talking about the global north and you're talking about the countries?
I'm talking about the oil-producing countries, right, and the major manufacturing countries in which major manufacturers that contributes most to the greenhouse gas emissions. We're talking about all of those corporate entities as well as governments. It's because at the end of the day, at the ICJ hearing, we'd hope that not only countries become held accountable, but also the oil-producing companies are held accountable, and those along the value chain that contribute to the greenhouse gas emissions.
But I mean, it's not only global north countries that fall into those categories. Under the UNFCCC, China is still considered a developing country. Also, many of the big oil-producing nations that you might be talking about here. But under that framework, what kind of action are you hoping to see?
I don't think the argument before the ICJ is defined to the countries in the global north. It is defined to countries that are contributing most to the greenhouse gases emissions. And so whichever country, whether they're situated in the global north or the south, will be held accountable. So it's not distinguished by north or south. The distinguishing feature is if you are contributing to greenhouse gases, you are to be held accountable for that conduct.
Last year at the COP, countries agreed to transition away from fossil fuels. What do you think about the action that has been taken so far following that?
Well, what do I think? I think I'll just say what we say, the jury is still out on it. The jury is still out because the signals that's being sent doesn't quite match with that sort of commitment. So, for example, in the U.S., a permission was granted, I'm advised, for a refinery producing 369,000 barrels of oil a day in Texas was approved about a year or so ago. In England, permission was given for the development of an oil field in the Midlands. I think something was said to be a large find. So the question is, for whatever reasons, those permissions were granted. But I only ask, what signal does that send to the rest of us who are talking about moving towards reducing our carbon footprint by moving away from fossil fuel? Does it align with that commitment? I don't know. Perhaps one day will tell us what we should read from that.
I mean, do you think policies like the US's Inflation Reduction Act are a good step forward, or?
Certainly a good step forward. I think that is a signature piece of legislation that deals specifically with climate change, and it is an act that we should hail and hold up, and hopefully that would signal the way to a more effective response to climate change, and other countries should just follow.
But considering obviously the US is now in a point where they're just about to have elections, the Inflation Reduction Act, who knows, whether it will stay in place as a result of those elections. Do you have any concerns, considering the US is also a big neighbor of the Bahamas?
Well, a concern about the elections? Or?
About the election results, I guess, and who might be...
Well, from where I've said, I will accept the will of the American people. And I think the American people appreciates the issues of climate change. And if that is what they wish, I would just have to abide their wish.
So we're talking about, obviously, if former President Trump is made president again, then, the potential to pull out of the Paris Agreement and other climate accords that are moving in that direction.
Yeah, well, again, it's a matter for the American people. If they vote for him and that's what he decides to do, again, I abide by that wish. But we, as a country, and others who will still be there, will have just to, paddle our own canoe, as it were, and we're prepared to do that.
I mean, coming back to the Bahamas, what obligations do you think that the Bahamas has to continue trying to reduce its own emissions, even though they are negligible, particularly given that obviously 50% of the GDP is coming from a sector like tourism, which also is a heavy contributor to climate change? We
are taking steps to eliminate, to reduce our carbon footprints, even though it's negligible. We are moving to EVs, government vehicles are transitioning to EVs, and of course it is not an inexpensive exercise, and within our resources we are doing our best to move to it. And so we have just entered into a new energy reform, a new energy era, where we're introducing cleaner energy for our generators, LNG, with a mix of solar, particularly in our family islands. Those are happening as well. And we are well on our way to doing that. And we have committed in our National Development Contribution NDC that we will, by 2030, reduce our emissions by 30%. And we are well on our way to achieving that goal. We have created an emission registry to be able to track and hoping to have incentives for companies and individuals who would contribute to the lessening of our footprints. So we're taking our own steps to do so. We're also looking at additionalities, in the sense we have started a coral gene bank to have restoration of some biodiversity to protect our coastal and marine life. We of course, as I indicated, we have discovered the seagrass, which has proven to be one of the most potent sequestering assets in the world, and hoping to to monetize it for the purpose of protecting it and ensuring that the loss is reversed. And those are some of the, we are taking our own steps to address these things, and likewise contribute to humanity by our efforts.
The COP29 later this year is supposed to centre around this issue of climate financing. What would you like to see coming out of those negotiations? What would be most helpful to small island states like the Bahamas?
First of all, operationalizing the loss and damage fund. There's still a lot of talk and negotiations going on. In fact, as I indicated, the loss and damage fund has been relegated to negotiations. And then providing the funding that's necessary for it. Instead of just talking and committing and pledging, you need to make that actual. And then the other aspect I'd like to see coming out of it is a change in what I call the criteria to accessing these funds, and setting up a protocol that is not full of red tape, where access to these funds are expeditious as opposed to dragged down in bureaucracy. And the criteria to getting those funds are such that the vulnerabilities of small island developing states are taken into account, as opposed to the per capita income of small island states.
Coming back to, I mean, you mentioned climate change as an existential crisis for the Bahamas. I mean, what plans are in place for your citizens as and when, you know, some of the islands disappear, for example? Is that something that you are looking at? And
not with the urgency at this time, because we feel, and I'm still optimistic, that we'll be able to reverse this this challenge, and that we have the ingenuity to have it reversed in time for me not to lose my islands. We just need to come together, acknowledge the issues, and invest in the research necessary to do so. And we are concerned that if nothing happens, what will happen? What shook me is the news that the 1.5 degrees Celsius was, in my word, was breached for 1 year straight. Not a day, not a week, not a month, but one complete year. The temperature was over 1.5 degrees Celsius, which was the threshold. So we're not going to meet that anymore, are we? And so what's the next step? And this is what this calls the urgency of action now, is because we have passed what we had set to achieve, and we need to move more swiftly to get our things done.
Just one last question. When you speak to the global north nations, what is it that you will be calling for them to do?
Write the check. As I said, promises have been made. Promises, I wouldn't say not kept, but it still remains to be kept. And I asked them to invest more in innovation, be more mindful and sensitive to the fact that in the event they do nothing, what could likely happen to their own interest. Because if they do nothing, they could be welcoming a number of climate refugees that could displace their own norms within their countries, could have impact on their political landscape, could impact the cohesion of communities. If they do nothing, it could impact and erode their GDP. And so is that what they want? So that's part of the consequence. And so yes, they may be driven more by what I call the profit, and they may be concerned about the costs that it might take to correct this challenge. But for me, that cost, will be more costly, or put another way, inaction will be more costly than the costs that they're worried about.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right, thank you.